Hello everybody, good afternoon. Welcome back to our final session of our Tortoise Global Education Summit. It's 4 o'clock. For those of you who've been with us the whole day, well done. That is some stamina you're showing. For those of us who've dipped in and out, also good decisions. I have water on the go because it's incredibly hot. So I hope you've enjoyed the day. It's been really stimulating and my brain is already kind of buzzing a little bit with things to think about and things to take on board. It's a real pleasure to welcome our guest for the closing keynote for today, George the Poet, who is somebody that every time we go out to Tortoise members to say, who are some of the people you would really, really want to hear from in a thinking, George's name, regular as clockwork, always comes back as somebody that people are interested to hear speak. We're a much younger newsroom than most other kind of quality newsrooms, and I wonder if that's part of the reason why George is always in the top 10. So it's a real pleasure to have him here. Just for those of you that have joined us just for this session and don't quite know how it all works, in a thinking, we will obviously hear from George, but we really want to hear from you as well. If you'd like to come on and make a comment or join in the discussion, we very much would like you to do that. You can either put up your little digital hand if you find the bottom of your screen, or I think it's at the top if you're on a tablet or a phone, your raise hand button, and I'll come and talk to you, or you can join in the chat. My colleague Claudia is moderating chat comments and things, so as George and I get going, please do weigh in with your own perspectives and experiences and maybe reflections on everything that we've heard today. George, how are you? Hi.
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you very much. It's a question that's, I wonder if there's a very short answer to this question, because we're here and you're here and of everything we've heard today, but the opening sort of gambit is it time for a revolution in learning? What do you think?
I think we are in a strong position for a revolution. I think the need has been apparent in the groups that are systemically and predictably unable to glean what we intend from our education system. So the fact that year in and year out, disproportionate numbers of kids on free school meals are underperforming according to the national average, kids from specific backgrounds with certain situations, and just all of the problems that we see in our academic community, the lack of representation from different groups. That indicates the need, but because of our position in terms of tech developments, our ability to communicate, the fact that we're all mini broadcasters, and the fact that we have an incoming generation into the workforce who have grown. I know this was supposed to be a short answer, I'm sorry.
No, go for it.
We have an incoming generation who have grown up as broadcasters, as content creators. I think it is, the time is right.
It sounds like you're involved in education and an organisation called Big Change, which if I'm clever and can get my buttons right, I'll post a link to in the chat in a second. It's something that's close to your heart. It's a big part of your story. Perhaps we'll come to that in a second. But it sounds in your answer just then that you feel optimistic that it's not only that the time is right, but that it's also possible. Yeah.
Most definitely. One of the things I love about Big Change, that's my education family. You know, they convened a group of us last year to talk about the future of education. And just that engagement alone made me realize that there's so many of us across the world from a number of positions. There are teachers doing amazing things. There are ministers, education ministers doing amazing things. There are chancellors of universities and practitioners, parents. There's so many people on the ground who have experienced the same frustrations with education and have overlapping concerns and have come up with innovations from different directions. So I am optimistic, very, very much so.
That's really good. It's really good to hear. It's been my feeling throughout the day has sort of gone a bit like this, where I felt really optimistic. Then, oh my God, it's a disaster. So I'm pleased that we're going to end on a high. I'd like to talk a little bit for if there are people listening who don't know too much about you and your story. There's a way that you spoke about the secondary school that you went to which was a turn of phrase that really hit home to me, which was, you described it, a selective grammar school, it was in North London, right, as a factory of social mobility. But I'm not sure that was a term that you were sort of using as if to go, it was brilliant, it was a factory of social mobility. It was a very much more conflicted than that. Would you tell us a little bit about your school, how you ended up there, what it was like, that kind of stuff?
Right. Well, the social mobility aspect really comes from the fact that the majority of kids there were Asian.
Right.
And an increasing number of them have been West African, Nigerian. But when I was there, what I saw was families or the children of people who had come to the UK mainly in the 70s. And those people had established a strategy of engagement with the UK economy. They identified a few opportunities in my area. A lot of them went into the convenience shop business. And I noticed that as a trend, but I never imagined that there was a strategy and a uniform approach across the community for it. But when I was in school, I realized that with the stability that their parents were able to secure, my Asian peers had a route or had a plan to go through education, to learn the tricks of the trade, basically, of how to survive in the form of British capitalism that we were receiving. And a lot of them just cracked on with that plan. I noticed that the families that I grew up around from my home neighborhood didn't necessarily have that strategy or that wherewithal or that access for different reasons. So my school was, I use the word factory. It was a factory in the sense that there was almost a standardized formula for success. And as you can imagine, there are winners and losers from any such situation.
Yeah. Were you happy at school?
I was a happy kid. I laughed a lot, but I wasn't happy with school. No, I wasn't.
The reason I asked that question is because I did a thinking earlier today where we talked about the question was, what should we teach? Like, what should the stuff be that people talk about in lessons, the content of the curriculum? And one of the threads in that conversation was about helping kids in school to come to terms with who they are, to be able to find their voice, to kind of, and it's not about having a lesson in how to be happy, right? But it's about everything, like fusing it all together. And a lot of the way when I've listened to you talk about education before, that sort of connectivity between the subject matter and the way it's delivered and all of that, it kind of plays into it. I loved it when you sort of said, you know, if I was going to give advice to a teacher, I'd be like, find out what the kids are into and make that your start point, even if it's Fortnite. She says, as the parent of a child who's obsessed with Minecraft, it slightly gives me the heebie-jeebies thinking about it. But I'd love you to talk a bit more about that, sort of as a route in to finding ways to make school be something that is joyful. I think is a thing to unpack.
Well, it's a really good question. And I reverse hack the success that I experienced as a rapper. And I mean, from 15 years old. 15, I did my mock GCSEs and my results were not great. They were all over the place. There was a U, a couple of D's in there, a couple of A's. After those results came through, I coincidentally threw myself into becoming a rapper. And what that involved was listening to rap or grime music specifically, non-stop, and becoming a practitioner, writing and performing more and more material than I ever had. Now, what that gave me was an appreciation of patterns. To write rhymes, you have to notice patterns. So there's something fundamental that happens there cognitively. Beyond the recognition of patterns, the substance of my rhymes had to be about my environment, because at 15 years old, that's a resource or that's experience that I have in abundance. Whereas I might not have experience beyond my environment that would give me something that I could passionately study and passionately talk about. Now, what happened in that window after I got my GCSE mock results to the finals was a complete turnaround. I didn't get less than an A in my GCSEs back when we were using the A system. And it was a long shot. My teachers were surprised, my friends were surprised, I was surprised, but I knew deep down that there was a cognitive transformation within me when I threw myself into the practice of something that was as relevant, exciting, and challenging as becoming a rapper in the environment in which I did.
And you found that inside of you, you decided yourself to do that? Did you know that that's what you were doing when you were doing it? Do you know what I mean?
Did I know that I was growing as a student while I was becoming?
Yeah.
I did. I remember I got suspended one time for something silly, but it was an internal suspension. So I had to sit in the head teacher's office or the deputy head's office. So I had to do my work. And in that space, I caught up with everything that was happening in terms of classwork, homework, and coursework, to the point where I had nothing else to do. So I started writing lyrics in my spare time. And those lyrics started to incorporate a lot of course material. And that was simply because I had a language that I could apply to any idea that entered my consciousness.
That takes me, I want to talk to you about language. It's been a recurring sort of refrain through the day. We've talked about in the session just before this one about labels and labeling and things. And when I was growing up, I was labeled really early on. I was a clever girl. She's a clever girl. And it's only recently that I've come to realize that because I was a clever girl, that meant that the idea that I would act up or act out was absolutely out of the question. Like I saw this huge fear of, letting people down and things. And I wonder if you were always aware that you were smart and brainy, or whatever the language was that people used to talk about you, or you used to talk about yourself, because obviously language now is your craft. Like that's your sort of material that you've built your career and the way you communicate and how you have impact in the world. I just wonder if if there are words that stuck to you when you were little that you've carried through to now, and that's where the power of language come from. Or
yeah, I think I share your experience. I think I was quite early on identified as a strong learner, someone who could take ideas and make them applicable in different scenarios, someone who could talk other kids in the class through the material. And that did instill within me a sense of responsibility, which, in the way that you described, which gave me parameters for my behavior, expectations of myself, which have gone on to feed into my work. Now, what I've noticed is that when I do work with school age learners or young people in prisons, my ability to acknowledge whatever strengths they may bring to the table informs how well the session is going to go. There's a fundamental confidence that is established when someone's experience that they're bringing, their insight, their habits, their worldview is validated from the outset. Now they feel like they might have they might have a fair shot at really contributing something meaningful.
Thank you very much. I know we could go on forever. We've got half an hour left, so I want to make sure I bring some people in who are watching and listening. So Herschel Patel, you've had your hand up for a little while, and Tom Denham, you've had your hand up for a little while. As my colleagues bring them across so that we can see them on camera, and hopefully we can hear what they've got to say. I did also, while we kind of connect the Herschel up, I wanted to ask you about the subject you studied. Sociology was your degree subject. How young were you when you started learning sociology? Where did you?
Yeah, I was 16. I started it at A level.
Okay, so I've never studied sociology, but I am interested in the way you talk about sociology academically, giving you a framework to understand some of the things that you were experiencing that were kind of throwing you off about, well, okay, so this is what my home reality was like, this is what my mates from home are like, and now I'm in this school and that's different and I feel weird about it. But that sociology sort of equipped you with an understanding that was empowering and actually weirdly sort of almost like a good for your mental health kind of thing. Like it was like eating broccoli equivalent for your brain, I'd love to understand that a bit more, because it's not something I've thought about, having not studied sociology myself, but I've studied linguistics and I have a similar experience with language myself. But just tell us a little bit about that and how it felt when you discovered the beginnings of that kind of structure and framework.
Well, I felt like throughout my educational career in a grammar school so different from the community I grew up in, a lot had not been said. There was a lot that wasn't comfortable about the situation. Going back to your question about whether or not I was happy, there was, my friends, my culture was conspicuous by absence in the school. I didn't necessarily blame the school for that, but I started to receive signals from society as to why that might be part of the status quo. Why it is expected that you won't find many young Black men in this school. Why it is expected that the teachers might not be comfortable with the way you talk and the way that you and your Black friends are carrying yourselves. Why you might feel so much of your identity is unwelcome in this environment. And sociology just gave me the language to have that conversation. Sociology was the first time that I felt in school that the context I was coming from, the experience that I was bringing to the table was understood and was recognized by the academic establishment.
Do you still read sociology books and stuff? Like, have you kept up your interest in it as a subject?
Yeah. I'm still deeply into sociology, and I notice it in times when it isn't packaged as sociology. For example, rap music. As I started to realize the sociology of the creation of rap, the reproduction of rap, and the sale of rap, that's when I started to notice big opportunities for people in situations like what we were coming from.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go to Herschel Patel. Hello. You had a point to make to Josh. I don't know what it's going to be about. You put up your little blue hand, so anything could happen. Go for it, Herschel.
Hi, George. I just wanted to say that I'm a big fan. I've seen quite a lot of your work, and especially your work around kind of educating not just people from disadvantaged backgrounds, but around racism, and just educating communities and groups of people that might deem that they feel that they're okay, and like how okay isn't good enough. And I think that's true of the education system as well. I think a lot of the education system feels that it's okay, but if we want like our kids to be better than we were, it needs to be better than just okay. I mean, I was fortunate enough; my parents managed to put me in private school for the second half of my education, but that involved them making a lot of sacrifices. So they weren't around a lot; they were working ridiculous hours, all the rest of it, to make sure they could pay for that stuff. So people feel these hardships in different ways, and like that was just kind of like my point is that even though someone might appear to be middle class, the experiences they have are different from a lot of other kind of middle class people. I didn't really identify with a lot of the people that I went to school with, so going forward I haven't really kept in touch with many of them for that reason. But going to university and finding the group of friends that I had there really allowed me to find a kind of a place where I felt at home. And I think that's important for kids, no matter where they come from, their ethnicity, their kind of social mobility or anything. If they can find somewhere where they feel comfortable and they feel like at home and have a way for learning, I think all kids have a natural ability to learn. It's just a matter of finding the right way for them to apply those things in the areas that they're interested in as well. And I think that's where schools really miss out, is they don't really find out what these kids are interested in. They're there to kind of teach reading, writing, arithmetic, and the rest of it's forgotten about. whereas you can teach that stuff a lot with the stuff that they're interested in.
Thank you so much, Herschel. I have to say, my little boy is he's only 9, but he's not found his groove yet with the little buddies in his class. So, you know, he's getting closer to secondary school, and I'm hoping he sort of, you know, finds his groove soon, because it's kind of sad, you know, when you don't just naturally gel with people, and I can see it affects the, you know, even self-confidence and stuff. George, are you still mates? Is your crew that you hang out with now, are they mates from when you were little, mates from when you were a teenager? Have you got a mixture? I'm hardly in touch with anyone when I was at school.
I've got a mixture. Thank you for your contribution, Herschel. There's so much of what you said that I identify with. The analogy that I use about what we stand to gain in formal education, and speaking to Herschel's point about the different kinds of losses and sacrifices that can happen, there's one analogy, and it's a chemical analogy. It's taken directly from GCSE chemistry. There's one module I won't forget, even though it's been like 12 years. It was about chemical reactions and how much of substance A reacting with substance B is wasted in the creation of substance C. And the substance C, the rate at which we're able to get something from that reaction is called the yield. Now, if substance A is the learner and substance B is the educational environment, the school, there might be things that the learner brings to the table which are not fully utilized in the learner's interaction with the school. There might be things that the school intended which are not fully carried over in the learner's experience. And ultimately, what you want is a career. You want a career, really, you want a life. You want someone who's able to integrate into the economy and to participate in the electorate in a responsible and meaningful way. However, if the yield of that reaction is not what it could be, then we're going to miss all of these things that learners are bringing. We're going to miss the value of people being in a social group that allows them to build a network beyond education. And I think if we can aspire to just limiting the waste and ensuring that everything that the school intends and that the learner is bringing to the table has a bearing on their educational outcome, then we'll be moving in the right direction.
Yes. Thanks so much, Tom. Hello, and then I'm just going to bring in over Alice as well, and Rachel's got a great question as well, so if we can work on getting Alice and Rachel over. Hi, Tom.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Hi, George. I'd just like to echo what Herschel was saying about being a big fan, and I love the podcast. I thought it was fantastic in so many ways. And I remember a certain episode, I believe it was the Grenfell story episode, where if the narrative follows a young teacher, and at the beginning there's a scene where she's underappreciated by the students, and then another scene where she's underappreciated by the headmaster or the head teacher. And then sadly, by the end, it comes to the student giving a eulogy about how fantastic this teacher actually was, and being able to kind of teach and communicate with the children so well. And I think you also say by the end of the episode that teachers are the fathers and mothers of the nation. So I wondered what you thought the British government and within the education sector, what they could do in order to appreciate teachers as individuals.
Oh, can we unmute George? There
Sorry, I was muted.
Okay, that's good.
Everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, yeah.
Thank you very much for that question. And thank you for listening to the podcast. I, last year, made contact with an economist, but also a professor at UCL called Mariana Mazzucato, and her thinking around the creation of value in, by the public and also by the government. Her thinking around that question has impacted me a lot and has aligned with a lot of my thinking around the creation of value in my community. Ultimately, Mariana Mazzucato advocates for a mission-oriented industrial strategy in which the government is led by outcomes, and those outcomes require it to pull the resources and the expertise of different departments to achieve single outcomes. Seems like a fundamental idea, but it is often what doesn't happen, right? Individual departments pursue individual goals with varying degrees of success. Now, I feel like that kind of approach, the commitment to a big outcome that draws on the variety of talent across government and across society, that will place the role of teachers in its rightful context. I think a lot of people think of education, and when I say people, I mean the general public, people who are not necessarily engaged with the education space. Across society, there is the feeling that the job of education and the intention of education is someone's job. Someone is delegated that responsibility, where in actual fact, it's a collective ongoing process. What do we feel is important that our kids are learning? What do we feel is the appropriate support for the teachers that are supposed to be teaching our kids, etc.? I think the more we can encourage a holistic perspective of what these teachers are up against, the reality of bureaucracy, the reality of red tape, and the reality of the kind of emotional and mental support that is required to fulfill the teaching profession appropriately. If more people across society had that awareness, then we would be able to provide support in ways that are currently not imagined, because we tend to kick that question over to Department for Education. That's someone else's problem.
Thanks very much. I hope that answers your question, Tom. I'm going to come to Alice now. Alice Thwaite. Hiya, Alice.
Hello. What a fantastic day, and what a fantastic keynote.
Go for it. Your question about cognitive processes.
I'm just really intrigued by what George was saying about finding strength, I guess. So you find the strength in your pupils, and then it's in a way you're validating their internal kind of state. And then that means that you will listen to their language, and then you can get new insights about their external world. And that kind of role that language plays in kind of the communication between the individual, the community, and the environment, and just exactly what intelligence is, because intelligence can't exist just in the brain, it has to exist between relations between things. And because I know that you come from a different field than me, I come from a philosophy background. I'd just love to hear your thoughts and reflections on that relationship between language, the internal, and the external.
Thank you very much for that question. You're going to give me an opportunity to tidy up the long-winded answer I just gave, because it is along the same thinking. From my experience of education and what has enabled me to have my own career in which I do my own thing, like I said, we learn and we engage in every aspect of our lives. Family, out there in the workplace, whatever we do in between. And ultimately, we have the opportunity, going back to what I said at the start of this keynote, we have the opportunity with the tech that we have now become accustomed to, that our kids are growing up with the proliferation of once marginalized voices. We have the opportunity to share our experiences in ways that were not possible once upon a time. Rap music is the story of that. Rap music should have never worked. It was a community that didn't have the resources to create music in the classical way, and ended up taking hybrid forms from Jamaica because they were in an immigrant situation. So again, you take your environment and you work with it, and before you know it, you have opportunities at self-determination that were not possible under the model that you inherited. But that process, much like Hannah was talking about being a linguist, and I'm sure you look at this in philosophy, the concept of linguistic creativity, how generations continually reinvent language. It's a very powerful thing. And if you take that to be an analogy of how we can reproduce and rethink learning, yeah, the possibilities really are limitless.
Thank you so much, George. I'm going to come next, actually. I'm going to come to Rachel. Rachel in a garden. Hi, Rachel. Okay, let's see if we can unmute you. Can we hear you?
Yep.
Oh, brilliant.
Great.
You had a question specifically about poetry, because of course George is a poet, so it would seem appropriate.
I did have
Ask him about
a
it.
specific poet question. I think I was really curious to understand what George thought poetry had as an art form over perhaps other different ways of learning, particularly in an educational context. And also which poets today, apart from himself, that he would rate as being particularly powerful forces in an educational context with children.
Thank you for your question. So firstly, I wouldn't necessarily say that poetry has advantages educationally over other forms. I think what I have experienced about poetry is that, first of all, I think I'm made for it. I think me and poetry are a good match. I didn't know that when I started writing. I was a rapper first, and I loved the rap. So that opened my mind. But when I found something that, for whatever reason, was more aligned with my natural inclination, it empowered me to grow academically. So I picked largely essay-based subjects. At A-level, I did history, English, sociology, and politics. Then at university, I did politics, psychology, and sociology with an emphasis on sociology. All of that is writing. All of that is about the environment. And that aligns very conveniently with poetry. It occurs to me that people have different passions. And I suspect that in everyone's passion, there is the opportunity to unlock your academic potential. It might not be poetry. It might be dance. It could be mowing the lawn. I know someone who gets a lot of pleasure from literally mowing the lawn. And if that's an opportunity to unlock this person's potential, then there should be a model that takes that seriously. And to your other question about poets who stand a good chance of being influential across British society, there's a few. I was speaking to a couple earlier today. There's a guy called Terrell Lewis from my area of Northwest London, who's very influential in bringing poets together, convening different talents, new talents. Rap is probably the most prominent form of poetry in modern society. Last year, UK rap accounted for 20% of all listenership, but rap is problematic. So what is also needed is a willingness, which English literature GCSE actually gave me, a willingness to decipher what is being said by these different poets in a way that can be applicable to your own learning process.
Thank you so much. Let's go to Francesca, who had a question about STEM and the sort of tension, I guess, between STEM and arts and humanities and stuff like that. Hi, Francesca.
Hi.
Hiya.
I've just finished year 13 and I've found that over the past couple of years, it's very STEM in terms of what is pushed. And that's great if that's your strength. But like you were saying, my strength has always been essay-based. And I was just wondering what you think the merits are of subjects that allow you to discuss and think more broadly, in the sense that they don't offer a straight answer, and how that needs to be facilitated in the education system.
Thanks for that question. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Cool. So what I want to try and avoid is, because I'm like you, I'm an essay writer. I like not having a definitive answer. I love weaving my way through arguments, but I don't want to I don't want to feed into the idea that that approach to the world is incompatible with the STEM subjects. I know that the style of teaching and the approach and the assessment criteria of the STEM subjects makes us feel like there are right answers and there are wrong answers, but there's a lot of magic in the application of those answers. I'm heavily into, for example, the career of Elon Musk, and 20 years ago, this guy got it in his head that he wanted to go to Mars and humans really need to become an interplanetary species at a time when everyone thought, A, not going to happen in our lifetime, B, there is no market demand for that, so why are you pushing that agenda? He also had the idea of solar energy being the big opportunity, even though no one figured out how to make money from it. he also had an inkling that electric cars might be the next revolution in the automotive industry. All of those hunches ended up paying off for him, and it's all grounded in his qualification in the STEM subjects, but it doesn't fly in the face of being able to imagine beyond what you're told is possible, right? So what I feel would be most beneficial is if the intention of teaching these subjects was to further fuel the creativity and the curiosity of our young learners.
Yeah. Thank you so much, and thank you for a brilliant question, Francesca. I'm loving your Wonder Woman t-shirt. That is very good look for today. I'm going to go to Russell, who's desperate to weigh in. Russell, you're a maths teacher.
Yes.
Hiya.
Hello. Yeah. So I was a maths teacher for 4 years. But I don't necessarily agree with the way in which maths and English and sciences are pushed so heavily onto every student. I'm also a teacher who has ADHD, and I know well how it feels to be forced into a system that was designed for someone whose brain works fundamentally differently. There is such beauty and such wonder in the differences between people, and I think that an education system that centrally organized by Ofsted and government policy to treat every student the same, to measure every student against a trajectory that doesn't match up with students that do have different home lives and different situations, I think is terrible. Our school system should look to bring out the absolute best in our students, like George was saying, help them find, develop, hone their talents. The students of today will be the ones making the greatest movies of the future, the greatest music of the future. All of the most wonderful bits of art and projects and businesses, that is the direction we should go. I think you'd probably be better off having business as a compulsory subject if that is going to be, if we're going to accept the way society is, we might as well give them the skills to actually go and make the most of it.
I would agree. I would very much agree. I do think this is why I find so much comfort in being around educationists and teachers. I think the fact that we are in a field in which we have to think about young people, how different they are, how fast society is moving, and what we want them to be able to leave school and achieve. Being in that field makes you think about these problems in a broader way than you would if you didn't have to have responsibility or accountability to young people. So I love being in these conversations. Thank you for that contribution.
Thanks so much, Russell. Henry Dingle, hello.
Hi.
Hiya.
It's so absolutely brilliant to be here. I'm just totally grateful for the whole day. Like I've said in the chat, I've been here all day, just hoovering it up. So yeah, thank you so much to Tortoise Media. And yeah, George, it's been amazing to listen to you. I mean, I've been, as many of you have shared, just totally, filled to the brim with the inputs of the day. And in my work, I work as an academic mentor for teenagers. I've been working as a tutor for 20 years or so alongside a music career. And I feel like I remain kind of in the stratosphere, just with these concepts like love, respect, openness. For me, that's how I want to meet young people and teach young people. And I in my life have never, as a completely born educator, I feel, considered stepping into a school because I don't know if I can uphold those kind of values. So my actual question that I posted relates a little bit to that, and George, I wonder if you'd have any comment on this. But as a tutor, as an independent academic mentor, and someone who is just out there a bit on my own in the margins working with the young people I do, I wonder what you think about the real change, as in many other areas of society, in education coming from the grassroots, not from our current institutions, not from our government.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. I think I'm very encouraged every time I realize how much grassroots transformation is happening. And then I get kind of FOMO, I get anxiety thinking, how many other innovations are going on that I just don't know about because there's no mainstream way of keeping up with these things. But like I was going back to what I was saying earlier about the power of tech and the time that we find ourselves in, I don't think it would be that hard to elaborate a system in which we're all better able to keep track of these innovations and swap notes across communities. That's what I look forward to. And if anything, that's what I'm banking on. That's what I'm betting my money on.
Thanks so much, Henry, for your question. We've only got 5 minutes left. I'd love to hear from Jennifer Allerton. Hello, Jennifer. Oh, hang on, let's unmute you.
There you go. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Great. Yeah, I was just chatting to Claudia and some of the others in the chat about this idea of STEM and the arts and humanities being kind of like opposite ends of the spectrum, and you're either one or the other, and you know they can't interweave or overlap. And where I work, we try and sort of break down that idea for school students as much as possible. So it's a company we called I'm a Scientist, and we run online text-based live chats for school students to chat directly to scientists, where sort of a lot of students don't always get that opportunity. They're not near a university where people will go out to them. And then, you know, students across the country can have this opportunity to chat to real scientists. And a lot of the time, one of the things some of them will ask will be like, I'm not that into, you know, I'm not a really mathematical person. I'm not really sciencey. I love arts. You know, is this for me? Could it be for me? And so many of the scientists we have, like there's one person I know who was really involved in November, Shrujita. She's amazing, and she also on Twitter posts quite frequently paintings and things she's done, and she loves both of these things and says how much like science is a really creative thing. It's about thinking creatively, finding different ways to look at a problem, just in the way that art is about finding different ways of looking at the world. And it's breaking down that idea that you can't be both, and that they have no relevance to each other, because there's so many ways that scientists point out to the kids, actually, this is a way that my work relates to, you know, what you're interested in, or other things have related to my work that you wouldn't think of.
Kudos for your work in trying to, you know, debunk that myth. I think there's no substitute for curiosity. Getting a young learner to look at someone who's doing science professionally and to ask, how does it work? And wow, discover that it is applicable to their reality. There is no substitute for that. But touching on a couple of points that were made earlier, I forgot the gentleman's name, the maths teacher, referenced the value of, for example, teaching business as a kind of compulsory engagement across the school career. I think in business, especially in entrepreneurship, that's where you'll find the confluence of a lot of these things. Philosophy meets science, meets maths, etc. And as long as we are presenting these academic endeavors as distinct paths that do not align and do not intersect, then we're setting ourselves up for a lot of reversal. And we've got to reverse the effects of people feeling like, I am a scientist, I can't write, or I'm a writer, I can't do maths. Yeah.
Sorry, just also, you've got to wrap up, but we'll also, it relates to something I noticed earlier in the chat, the session that was to do with sort of not having one job for life, is that often people will look at someone commenting on something in the news, or, you know, someone on Question Time, and say, well, you're just an actor, or just a rap artist, or just, you know, just whatever. And it is that boxing of people of, that is your job, so you can't talk about anything else. You must not have any other interests, any other expertise on things. But, you know, everything works together, and everyone has life experiences and education. And, you know, you talking about sociology to people shows that it's like, oh, yeah, I'm a rap artist and a sociologist, or, you know, I have this strong interest and expertise in sociology. And people sort of box people straight away and say, I don't want to hear you talk about this because you don't look like an expert on that to me because you're X profession. It's changing that idea. So anyway, sorry.
Thank you
so much, Jennifer. I'm so sorry, it's already 45 minutes, time is up, and wow. I feel like we could run and run. I do, if I can, just want to, because it's the closing keynote of the whole day, and we started with touching briefly on whether or not you felt optimistic about learning and schools and education and young people's futures and stuff, George. So I just wanted to ask a question that well, she's my boss actually as private messaging me in the chat, so I makes sense to ask you, which is but I think it's a nice one to end on, which is what brings you joy? What really brings you joy in your life?
What brings me joy is being able to facilitate conversations that look like they would never happen. I love that. I'm going to be on BBC Question Time later tonight. It is specifically the under 30s audience special. And I hope that is another opportunity to give our young learners and beyond a view of how you can engage, because obviously everyone knows me as George the Poet, but I intend to, speaking to Jennifer's last point, I intend to keep challenging your assumptions of what I can and can't say and where you may or may not be able to make your impact.
Thank you so much. What a brilliant answer and a wonderful way to end the day and to end the session, and good luck on question time. Have you done question time before, or is it your first time?
Yeah, I've done it before.
You've done it before. Okay, so he's an old hand at this, guys. We don't need to worry about it. It's been a real pleasure to have you, and we could, as I say, we could have run and run. I got all of these questions that I wanted to ask you and I haven't had time to do, but thank you so much, George, for taking an hour out of your day to sit inside away from the sun and talk about this stuff. It's so important to us at Tortoise and to everybody who's tuned in today. It will take us some time, I think, after such an epic day of thinking and ideas, to pull out the sort of journalistic threads that we'll put into our reporting. But the point of Tortoise is to exist to try and make a difference and to produce some stuff that lands and has impact. And we've got a lot of work to do to shape this into something that really makes sense. So thank you very much to you, George, and to everybody who has joined us today. Congratulations to Polly and all of the crew who've put today together. Even though it was too hot for Wi-Fi in South London, somehow we've managed to kind of roll with it, and it's really been a real pleasure. All of the sessions will be available to watch back in the Tortoise app if you would like to do that. Thank you, of course, to Santander, who are our founding partner and help us to be able to keep the lights on and everything else. It's been a real pleasure, and have a wonderful rest of the afternoon. And if you really want to, we've got another Thinking at 6:30 this evening with the amazing Cash Carraway on her book, which is it's called Skin to State. It's all about growing up in austerity Britain. So if you fancy another one, come back at 6:30 and we'll see you there. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Rihanna. Bye.
Bye-bye.